Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? Very robust response, considering it's 6 o'clock. That bodes well for the rest of the evening. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Tashika Griffith. I have the pleasure and the honor of serving as the provost here at St. Petersburg College for the downtown and midtown campus. You are now at our Midtown Center. And as you may have been able to see in the short time that you've been here in the walk to the community room, it is a lovely facility. Over 49,000 square feet, state-of-the-art classrooms, science labs. I mean, we've definitely been blessed with this site. I have to say that nothing against my comrades at other campuses, but you're now at the best campus at SPC. And let me tell you why that is. We are a smaller site, meaning that we have the ability to really and truly engage our students with our faculty members. We are in a very small, intimate site, which bodes well for our community members to be able to engage with staff, to walk in and get premium quality service immediately. For our students to be able to engage in the discussion that you're about to partake in about science, technology, math, general education courses, it's not necessarily something that students have readily available at our larger campuses. So that's a point of pride for us. It's a bragging right for me as a provost to be able to guarantee that our students have that face time with our faculty and our staff members. So hopefully in the short time that you've been with us, you've experienced that small, intimate, and caring family feel at the Midtown campus. This building, Douglas L. Jamerson Junior Center building, was erected actually 3 years ago. We just celebrated our 3-year anniversary of the erection of this building on August 1st, 2015. And with this building being built, we made a very strong commitment to the community in South St. Pete. And we're very proud of that commitment. And this building really represents the pathway to real change and mobility for South St. Petersburg. So we're just happy to be a part of that, and we're happy to have you as a part of that as well tonight. Definitely would be remiss if I did not thank the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions for having me do the welcome. Thank you very much. Very excited for us to have this conversation on climate health and well-being. It is not lost on me that unfortunately we are anticipating Hurricane Michael. So I think that this conversation is happening obviously at the perfect time, and it shows the need for this discussion because we're experiencing climate changes and weather disruptions, I would argue, more frequently than in years past. So I'm very excited to hear the discussion tonight surrounding that. So welcome, and without further ado, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Kimberly Jackson. She serves as our academic chair for the downtown midtown campuses for our social and behavioral sciences. They've been having a very robust week of very, very controversial, I would argue, in this political climate topics, but our students have been very excited, and we definitely are appreciative of all the events that they've been hosting at the Midtown and our downtown centers. So welcome, everyone. Dr. Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Griffith, and I want to say thank you to you all for taking time out of your evening to come to our campus. Dr. Griffith is right. We work hard here to create an environment that's warm and loving and that makes the students know that they are fully supported here. I'd like to thank all the physicians who are taking time out of your evening to come here to discuss this most important topic. And of course, I'd like to thank my dean, who's ultimately very supportive in everything we do. Dr. Joseph Smiley is the head of our Social and Behavioral Sciences Department. And finally, I'd like to thank the Institute personally while I have this opportunity. Every time I ask you all say yes. I sort of love that. And I appreciate you collaborating and coming down on this side of the county to have this meaningful talk. I'm here to introduce Lisa Vanover, and she is the Vice President of the League of Women Voters of St. Petersburg. Many of you all may know her. I often, although I have not had the League of Women Voters come here. We have them at the downtown campus often. We talk about them often because the work that they do in educating the community is extremely important. She is the chair of its Sustainability Action Team and is currently an Academic Services Administrator for the Office of Graduate and Executive Education at USF St. Petersburg College of Business. And she previously coordinated the Career and Technical Education at SPC, and so we're happy to have her back. I also want to say, in light of I don't know if you've heard of the report that came out about global change today. That's really important that the United Nations had, I believe there were over 91 scientists from different countries who spoke out about the fact that in just 11 short years, we won't have a lot that we can do about global change and climate. I also like to talk about the fact that it is disproportionately impacts us from an economic and community perspective. The reality is when you have means of different levels, your impact is different, right? So I hope that you all ask questions. I hope that you enjoy it, and I also hope that you come back. And finally, I want to do one last plug. We have Bakari Sellers, who is coming on Wednesday to our all-state campus to talk about civility and how democracy works. So thank you so much. Lisa.
So, good evening. Hi, I'm Lisa Vanover from the League of Women Voters of St. Petersburg area and Vice President and Chair of Sustainability. My background is in two things, higher education, but also energy management. So for 9 years, I worked in clean energy to reduce the energy consumption for public housing authorities all around the country, and on projects as small as $200,000 up to $6 million, $20 million. And so when I decided to come back to higher education, I moved that passion for clean energy over into the League of Women Voters. And one of the things I'd like to share that we're doing right now that you might not be aware of is our solar co-ops. So we've had 3 St. Pete solar co-ops. Our president, Julie Kessel, and I went to the St. Pete City Council last year, obtained funding, and they were very supportive and got us funding for Solar United Neighbors as well as Solar and Energy Loan Fund. So together, these two nonprofits help people be able to go solar, even people from low and middle income backgrounds who may not have a down payment or cash available to go solar at the beginning. So that's kind of one of the solutions that can be offered to these things. So I didn't know if you might not know about that opportunity, thought I would share it. You can go to solarunitedneighbors.org/St. Pete and find out all kinds of upcoming information in regard to that. But to Dr. Jackson's point, earlier today we did have that announcement of the need for dramatic climate action, and I'm sure our panelists will be discussing that, so that'll be a good part of our conversation today, as well as the Hurricane Michael, and as well as a wonderful event this morning, which we'll talk about some more, from the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and they are working on an intergovernmental compact to reduce climate change. We'll go into that, but and make our communities more resilient. Really excited about that. Definitely needed at this moment in time. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Maria Scambati. She grew up in South Florida, but left in 1981 to study biology at Warren Wilson College in Swannanoa, North Carolina. She received her MD from Wake Forest University School of Medicine, is trained as a hematologist-oncologist. She spent 10 years working at the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C., While still in D.C., Maria's passion for the natural world and ecosystems led her to work on watershed issues and a variety of biomedical projects. She returned to Florida in 2013, living first in Cedar Key and working for the U of Florida's Seahorse Key Marine Lab as Assistant Director of Education and Outreach Programs. Maria has long had the idea to integrate her medical background with her deep care of the environment as a way to give back. Since 2017, Maria has lived in Tampa, where she is an adjunct professor and is a principal consultant at Helping People, Helping the Planet. Please welcome Maria.
Thank you for that nice introduction, Lisa. It's always sort of weird to hear yourself talked about by somebody. I always have this experience like, wow, did I do that? So thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight. So I wanted to start with this slide because I got to tell you, I love Florida. If you had asked me when I was 18 and I left West Palm Beach, which then was still sort of a not big town, that I would say I love Florida, I'm coming back, I wouldn't have come back, but after 30 years away, I just felt like I needed to come home, and when I thought of home, I thought of Florida. So I'm really happy to be back here. I want to tell you, when Jacqueline and I first started talking about planning this talk, we did not plan for there to be a hurricane. That was not part of our planning structure, so. And I also like this picture because look how beautiful our state looks from up above. It's a beautiful place. So I'm here today on behalf of Physicians for Social Responsibility Florida, and I think we've got a couple other, if you can raise your hand, Mary Beth and Carson's here, and Lynn Ringenberg as well from the organization. So why have I put physicians small and social responsibility large? So Physicians for Social Responsibility was started, I think, in the 60s. I might have the year wrong. When there was a lot of concern about atomic weapons testing and the fallout from exploding atomic weapons up in the atmosphere was falling on grass, cows were eating the grass, it was getting in the milk, and it was getting in kids' teeth. And PSR was founded on that and made some discoveries and breakthroughs that led to them being part of an international coalition that won the Nobel Peace Prize. 10 years ago, Lynn Ringenberg started the Tampa chapter. In 5 years, just shout out if I'm making up data here, Lynn, because now that I don't work in science, I make up data all the time. And then it started as a state chapter 5 years ago. So our primary focus is still nuclear proliferation and war, because we still have a lot of nuclear weapons, and that is a grave threat to all life on Earth. We've also been very involved in climate change and its human health impacts, as well as natural gas fracking, and environmental and toxic chemicals. And we have some materials out on the table, and you can sign up to get our newsletters. Okay, I'm going to attempt to have a microphone in one hand. This is a dangerous moment for an Italian. I've got a microphone in one hand and a clicker in another. You got to keep me straight, Jacqueline. Did that go? Oh, that way. Okay, so I'm a professor, so I often give little quizzes to my students. So you guys get to be, how many students are in the audience? Raise your hands. Excellent. Thank you for coming. There are both harmful and beneficial effects to humans from the environment. True or false? True, right? So what's a beneficial effect? Excellent, great. This is why I love having students in the audience, because they're like, I want to show what I know. So anybody else want to show what they know? Okay, so let's get a little closer to home. It's true. So I like to think about the basics, being a doctor, air. We have to breathe air, right? I don't make my own air to breathe. The planet makes it for me. Clean air is good, dirty air not so good, right? We need water to drink. I don't make my own water. The planet provides it for me. Clean water, good. Who wants to drink a glass of water like that? Healthy soil, right? A little bit more hidden to all of us, because now, how many people here even have a garden or grow some of their own food, right? 100 years ago, more people would have done that. But healthy soil is the key to food production. This is sort of an image of one of the things we're doing to our planet, is we've got a lot of waste in landfills now. Okay? Our survival depends on the planet. I'm sorry to say this, I think the planet would survive without us, but I don't think we can survive without it. Okay. I'm still a scientist at heart, even though I'm a physician. Scientists just love to argue all the time about stuff. They will debate over little minuscule things. So here I've got, these are sort of, people debating, scientists debating something really esoteric. Here's really a critical question they're debating. Was it the chicken or the egg first? But the reason I'm showing this slide is because you read a lot in the newspaper and you hear a lot on the radio and you see a lot on TV. But as one of the speakers said, 91 scientists who were meeting in Paris this past week all agree that climate change is real and it's happening. So this discussion is not about whether it's real or not happening, but I want to tell you that most scientists around the world agree that the planet is getting warmer. So scientists sit in little offices, gather lots of data, and make figures like this. Okay, so I actually had a hard time understanding what was happening, to be honest with you. Why is the planet getting warmer? Why does 1 degree of temperature matter? Anybody got an idea? Why does 1 degree? Okay, another. Why are we concerned about? Oh, thank you. See, Jacqueline's there to keep me under control. So we're talking about surface temperature. So has anybody ever gotten under a blanket at night and at first you're cool, but then after a while you heat up? Right? So that's your body temperature heating it up. That's kind of what's happening with our planet, except the blanket is this kind of the greenhouse effect, this big atmospheric layer. So that's why just a little bit of temperature at the surface is making a big difference for what's going to happen on the planet, and it kind of traps the heat in here. So now we're going to switch into a little bit. So what implications does this have for us, right? I love panda bears myself. I love fish, but I happen to be a human. I trained to take care of humans. So what impact does this have on us? So it turns out it has a lot of impact on us. I'm going to just get a little sip of water. Right, so I really like this graphic image from the Centers for Disease Control. So they put this out from their climate and health program. So what they're doing here is saying, like, it's all connected. Basically what this slide is saying, it is all connected. I'm trying to find the pointer on here. I think that's the pointer. So in the middle, what you've got here is what is going to happen with climate change. We've got rising temperatures. We've got more extreme weather, right? We've got rising sea levels and increasing carbon dioxide levels, right? And these are all going to lead to these effects. We've got air pollution, changes in vector ecology. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Increasing allergens, water quality impacts, water food supply impacts, environmental degradation, and extreme heat. So that's sort of the inner core of what's happening. The human health effects are kind of that outer ring. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about social and psychological effects. And I want to tell you, I was looking at this slide right before the talk. And so you see under forced migration, civil conflict, they have mental health impacts. Injuries, fatalities, mental health impacts from severe weather. But the reality is, if you have asthma, you're probably having mental health impacts from that. It's a stressful disease to have, right? So in effect, the social and psychological effects touch all these areas. It's happening now. This is not something that we're talking about in the future. It's all happening now. We're seeing sea level rise, hurricanes and storm surges, flooding, drought, extreme heat, and wildland fires. This is not something that is off in the distance. It's happening now, and it's probably going to accelerate. Yeah. 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 Good. So that's a good comment, and I just want to say we're going to give our talks, and then we're going to have about 20 minutes. So if we can just, I might ask questions, I'm going to try to refrain from it. We're going to have like 20 minutes where we can have a dialogue and question and answers. So again, it's all connected. This is just another slide showing the direct and indirect effects on human health. So there's not any sector of the environment in which human health will not be impacted by climate change. Cardiovascular disease, cancer risk, mental illness, it's all going to be impacted, and it's being impacted now by what's going on. Okay, so we're in Florida. Just take a look at the slide on the left. So this is some data from Climate Central. It came out in the Miami Herald, I think, a couple years ago. top 25 metro areas with biggest increase in heat index days above 104 degrees. Florida's on there. Florida's at the top. Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, number 10. Florida is going to feel the heat, no pun intended, but this is what's happening now. On the slide, September was the hottest on record. Did anybody read the Tampa Bay Times 2 days ago? That's what was in there 2 days ago, hottest on record. So on record means, maybe 100 or 150 years. What does heat do? So I'm not going to go into detail, but heat stroke, heat stress, and things like that. Vulnerable populations, elderly, babies and children are more affected physiologically. People with chronic conditions are more susceptible to heat stress. People who are homebound or homeless, the mentally ill. Farm workers are incredibly at risk for heat stress and heat illnesses and deaths from heat. And low income and people who have a potential lack of air conditioning. So a lot of population that can be impacted. And I don't know, does anybody remember in Irma, the 12 people who died in the nursing home from heat-related deaths, right? So a lot of this is actually preventable, and will be an important area to focus on. Flooding, right? We're going to have more flooding risk. I think the top, that's people walking through sunny day king tide flooding in Miami, right? So Miami is now seeing flooding at high tides during the king tides without any storm events. Water's coming up through the storm drains, flooding the streets. It's being seen in other places around the world. The slide below that is people coming out of their house in Fort Myers after Irma, all right? Tampa Bay, so scientists also sort of are constantly analyzing data and ranking things. So right now, I'm sorry to say, Tampa Bay is in the #1 position for storm surge risk. We may drop away from that. But part of it has to do with that we've got this bay, and if a hurricane comes right up that bay, it will just push. It's going to push all that water right up the bay. So that's why we're #1 for that. The hurricanes of the past might not be the same as the hurricanes of the future, right? So they may increase its frequency. I recently heard somebody from NASA Goddard said, they're not so certain. They think they might increase in frequency, but what they're really concerned about is that they're going to increase in strength, right? And that he said we might not have seen the top of the Saffir-Simpson scale. So a Category 5 hurricane may not be the strongest hurricane that's possible, right? So when I heard that, I'm like, whoa, if the water heats up beyond levels that we've seen in the past 100 or 150 years, the hurricanes are fed from that hot water. We could see stronger hurricanes. So partly we saw that with Irma last year, right? This hurricane on the left up there, that's Hurricane Andrew. Very powerful storm, but look at the size of it compared to Irma. Or what I remember is looking into Irma, it was I remember Jacqueline. That's my Italian. It covered all of Florida. I kept telling friends from the East Coast, come here. Then they came here. I'm like, go back there. It covered the whole state. It was a huge storm, right? So hurricanes have the potential to increase in intensity, and I think we're already seeing that. So now I'm just going to talk about how am I doing on time? Is anybody 1 minute, 5 minutes? Good. I'm Italian. I can talk faster. So what are we seeing in terms of some specific things? So Naegleria fowleri is a freshwater amoeba. It loves to live in warm, fresh water. It's predominantly been seen in Texas and Florida, so it's very, very rare. It's very, very rare. In the last, I think since 1965 or something, there's only been 35 cases in Florida, but of the 130 cases in like the last 30 years, 3 people have survived. So it's a very fatal illness. There's a lot of concern that we're seeing this creep northward as freshwater bodies warm, that we're going to be seeing more of this, not only in this state, but in other states north of here. Oh, this is a nice little infographic. I don't quite know how that happened. Sometimes I don't even know what technology is doing. Current asthma prevalence. So part of the reason I wanted to put this slide in is because the asthma prevalence is creeping up. The asthma prevalence is creeping up, and because there's a disparity a racial disparity, right? So blacks are much more likely to have asthma. I think whites are below that and Hispanics are below that. So physicians are saying they're seeing more and more asthma cases in kids, and we project that this is going to rise with climate change. Tick-borne, so vector-borne illnesses, and broadly speaking, with tick-borne illnesses and mosquito-borne illnesses. So people have heard about Lyme disease, right? People have heard about Zika, right? So Lyme disease transmitted by ticks, Zika transmitted by a mosquito. So since 2004, tick-borne illnesses have doubled in the United States. That's primarily been Lyme disease. Lyme disease has kind of been steadily marching south and is now in Florida. I hope and I'm sure Gayle has much more data on that. So we're probably going to continue to see increases in Lyme disease. And then we've seen new vector illnesses like Zika showing up in the United States, and possibly malaria and dengue as well. So we're probably going to see more and more of existing diseases as well as what are called new vector-borne illnesses. So it's a little hard to stand up here because you watch people's faces go like this and then people start to get like, okay. So this is about the possible extension of the changes that we're going to see in terms of malaria distribution. So I'm going to go through that since I'm short on time. So this is my transition slide. This is where I say what we do matters individually and collectively, right? So we kind of want to stick our hand, sometimes I'm even giving this talk and I think I want to go hide underneath my bed like the cat in this picture. I want to stick my head in the sand. I personally don't think it's hopeless, but I think what we do individually and collectively really matters a lot. So what can we do? I think top and foremost is we've got to reduce use of carbon energy and accelerate a transition to clean energy. Lisa spoke about the solar co-ops. We have the technology. This is not new technology. It's moving along quickly. What we now need, frankly, is a little political willpower to make it happen, right? We waste a lot of energy in the US. Burning of fossil fuels has contributed heavily to air pollution and to climate change. So we can transition to solar and wind power, right? Here's a beautiful, development with solar panels on the top. We can do simple things like automatic light shutoffs could reduce a lot of energy consumption. So when you leave the building, the lights go off. Switch to energy efficient light bulbs, low or zero emission vehicles. You also have the benefit of getting a parking space close to a building. If you drive one of those vehicles, here's a solar powered train. This solar-powered train did not debut in the United States. It was in Australia. Okay, so the health co-benefits, we could see improved respiratory health, decreased cases of asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, decreased cardiac illnesses, and possible decrease in dementia and neurological diseases. There's increasing concern about particulate matter in the air from the burning of fossil fuels and whether that's getting into our brains and causing neurological diseases. So regreening our cities through restoring the tree canopy. Man, anybody ever walk out into a parking lot in the middle of August in Florida, right? So look at that picture. Anybody ever done this? Let me see if this is me. Like, look at that guy. He's pulled out of the parking space onto the grass to park underneath a tree, because when you come out and you get in your car, it's going to be about 40 degrees cooler, right? So, but what have we done in the city? What have we done? I just saw development recently around here. I was driving around today. Trees are cut to the ground, right? So we really, people argue about the tree canopy, but it has so many benefits that I feel one of the things that we should be doing now is planting trees to reduce this heat island effect. The impervious surface, all that concrete, the side of buildings, it just reflects a lot of heat and heats up. Oh, I just got that was a very nice zero. I just got the sign. Where I came from in Washington, D.C., we're doing a lot of green roofs, okay? They absorb the heat, absorb water. Here's people growing food vertically, right here. So instead of just having a blank concrete wall, you can grow food vertically on the side of buildings. Okay, I'm gonna skip the food one just to say that large-scale food production is now thought to be a large source of carbon dioxide emissions. So I just got my time's up, so that's why I'm going through quickly. So we could eat more food locally. There's an initiative called Meatless Mondays where we don't eat any meat at all. I would like to say I'm nearly a vegetarian, so I'm trying to do that. And then St. Pete, hats off to them. They've got the sustainable urban agricultural thing. So St. Pete is really kind of setting the stage for what the rest of Florida can do in terms of urban agricultural food production. Because when we produce food closer to home, we don't have to put it on a truck, burn more fossil fuels, and get it to our house. So one day a long time ago, I just decided to stop buying asparagus from Peru in the middle of winter because I realized I don't need to eat that in the middle of winter and have somebody truck it over here. So this morning, several of us were at the signing. So what we do individually matters, but what we do collectively matters. So this morning, we were all at, several of us were at the signing of the Tampa Bay Regional Resiliency Coalition. Have I got that? Have I said enough R's? I got to tell you, this is so important. We are only the second region in Florida to do something like this, where we've come together as a region and say, we are so concerned, we want to coordinate our efforts to improve our resiliency and deal with what's coming. So I think we should all take our hats off, and hopefully we'll have the momentum to go forward with that. And this last slide is really just a shout out to my colleagues at PSR Florida, and also to the Foundation for a Healthy St. Pete, who have helped supported the PSR Florida and purchased the food for tonight. And I really like to end on a positive note. This was from the U.S. Climate and Health Alliance report, and I'll just read it. At the same time, action on climate change provides one of our greatest health opportunities because many climate change solutions will improve community environments and the public health and reduce health inequities. Everybody can benefit, right? And that glass is there because I like to say an optimist sees the glass half full, a pessimist sees it half empty, and a realist says it's both, right? So we got a big problem, but I think the solutions are within our reach. We have to act individually and we have to act collectively. So thank you for your attention. Sorry I went over. That's the slide I'm skipping.
Thank you so much, Maria. Next up, we have Miss Gayle Guy, and she is the Assistant Director for the Health Department in Pinellas County and has been since August of 2015. She directly oversees the Disease Control, Environmental Health, Communications, and Preparedness divisions. These divisions consist of programs such as immunizations, epidemiology, I know that word, I don't know why I stumbled, HIV, STD prevention, community environmental health, water and septic systems, child care licensing, as well as special needs sheltering. She is currently facilitating the Pinellas County opioid task force. Gayle was previously a public health preparedness planner, and she conducted planning, training, and preparedness response operations for the department. She started at the health department in 1991. She received her certification as a registered environmental health sanitarian from the National Environmental Health Association in 2011. She received her master's degree in epidemiology at the University of South Florida, Tampa, also in 1997. She completed her bachelor's degree in biology at the University of Tampa in 1990, and she also graduated from the Public Health Leadership Institute of Florida, Class 9, the Environmental Public Health Leadership Institute, and the Florida Emergency Management Academy, Class 3. Please welcome Gayle.
Hi. Good? Good. So you're going to hear a lot of similar information. And I do want to say that I appreciate a room such as this, but I believe that we're all like-minded individuals. As a public health practitioner, my responsibility in Pinellas County and in the state is about people. Public health is about population-based data and population-based solutions. So if you are going to hear my talk tonight and you agree, that's because you're probably like-minded. But think of the things that I have to do every day. Just recently, we had 7 measles cases in Pinellas County. Now, how do you tell a parent how important it is to vaccinate your child against a disease with which you can prevent? and still they do not do it. So I understand that in this room today, we probably have people that understand the science and the technology and what's going on today. But unfortunately, we have to say things out loud to many people often and try to defend stances. So that's what I'm here to do today, to talk about the population. Because I'm going to say some of the same things that Maria said, but I'm also going to tell you about things that we can do today and forever, and what we should have been doing for many, many years so far. So my talk is about disaster preparedness, and my background has a lot to do with disaster preparedness, and I will apologize because it is my bad karma with which brought Michael. Because I'm like, this is going to be easy. I'm going to talk about hurricanes, no big deal. Everybody's going to say, oh, yeah, that Irma, it really stunk. But it is what it is. And so, as you know, disasters are such that they're either naturally occurring, man-made, terrorism, or even IT-related. You can have a lot of different type of disasters. And basically what they do is they cause chaos, and you can plan and prepare for them, but you can also be traumatized by them. So the best thing to do is try to do as much as you can ahead of time. And hurricanes such as Michael, which people were having a great Sunday, and then all of a sudden on Monday heard there's going to be a Cat 3 in Pensacola, were really shocked. And you shouldn't be, because this is the time of year when the hurricanes spin from that particular area, they get over the warm water, and they go crazy. So nobody in Florida should be surprised. And I sometimes ask people how many of you actually were born in Florida, but even Floridians don't do themselves a good service by paying attention to hurricanes. And I want to say, I tell this to my staff, and I'll tell this to you tonight, don't tell people that you lived through a hurricane. If you were here during Irma, that was not a hurricane. It was a hurricane down south, but by the time it got here, there was some sustained winds, there was a lot of electricity problems, but no surge was here. And surge is the hugest problem. So I don't want you to, don't tell your friends up north, oh, I've been through a hurricane. I'm not worried. Because in the history of hurricanes, it is usually the ones that skim us like this, the next one comes and it kills more people because they don't leave. And that's my concern, because we're gonna have another hurricane that comes, people aren't gonna leave, and we're gonna have a problem. So hurricane season is when? And I'm not going to ask because we don't have a microphone, but everybody knows this, right? Because you're all from Florida, and you know it's June 1st and to November 30th, right? People say, oh, November-ish, right? Yeah, November 30. Well, why is that? Well, usually the peak is September 10th. And that is usually when we see the most storms. And you can see from this graph here, the red is hurricanes and tropical storms. The yellow is just hurricanes. Well, why is that? Well, hurricanes like warm water, and they don't like wind shear. So at that particular time of year, the water is warm enough and the shear stops. So as you see, warm ocean water, wink, wink, the oceans are getting warmer, causes for stronger hurricanes. So is there a causal relationship? And Maria talked a little bit about this, and there is data, and we can talk a little bit about the data. If you take all the hurricanes from a long time ago until now, and you do a little math, and take their duration, their strength, and the time with which they're around, you can see the graph on the top and the graph on the bottom. The graph on the top is increasing, and that is with an increase in sea level temperatures in the area with which they typically grow. So if you know of hurricanes and when they grow in the Atlantic, that particular area would show an increase in frequency. The bottom slide is if it is all of the Atlantic. So this is why there's a disparity in the data, because it says, well, if you take all of the Atlantic into account, you're not really sure. But in the end, it's the frequency that's going to kill us. And like we said, Saffir-Simpson scale goes to 5 now, but who knows what it can actually do. So we're really concerned about it because in the end, even a tropical storm can be hazardous for us. So really, I don't like people to get stuck on the numbers. They really need to look at the effects of what can happen. So surge is already a problem, and I think this is the part that people don't understand. During Irma, I had people calling me saying, okay, I live on the beach, what do I do? And I said, well, your evacuation level is A, and in an A, it can go to 11 feet. How tall are you? Oh. And we're calling for a B. How tall are you again? I had somebody ask, should I put my couch on blocks? I said, take the block and put it on your head because I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Thank you. So, and I understand that these storms change and they move and they do different things, but when you have the ability to make a difference and do something differently, you should choose to do so. So in the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council that we talked about this morning, they have a lot of data about the potential for sea level rise. And I've had people say, well, look, it's only 90% probability in 2025 you're going to have seven more centimeters. What difference does that make? That's silly. Well, it matters when Pinellas looks like this. On the left is all of the surge zones, and this is the slosh model. So this means that if you take all the waves and the increase in water during a hurricane, that's how you grow your evacuation zone. So A is on the coast, B, C, and D, and you can see that there is some areas with which the water inundates different waterways and it causes a problem. On the right-hand side is the protective factors which we may have to do for sea level rise. So that's if you can put up some walls. And you can put up some borders. And there are already parts of Florida that are having to deal with inundation of water all the time now. So does anybody live in Coffee Pot Bayou here? Okay. Coffee Pot Bayou, you probably should have a John boat, because when it rains for about an hour, you can't get in and out. People have to park and walk in all the time. It's the standard for that area. There's no wall that's going to help Coffee Pot Bayou. It's a beautiful area, and it's unfortunate. So heat is already a problem. We talked about that because it has been the hottest Florida on record. And as you remember with Irma, there was a challenge. This particular nursing home, like we talked about, had some deaths. Ultimately, they actually had air conditioners installed. Now, when you have some knowledge, sometimes it can be dangerous. So a lot of people had hurricane issues and they went out and they bought a generator. And the first thing they do is they put it in their garage, they shut their garage door, and then they fall asleep and die because they don't understand how a generator works. This particular nursing home, they had portable air conditioners. Now, what you may not know about a portable air conditioner is that you have to exhaust the heat. If you've ever seen them, I call them R2D2. So basically, it's a little unit, you exhaust the heat. They exhausted the heat into the ceiling of the second floor. So the first floor was cool, the second floor was 97 degrees. They did not evacuate the people from the second floor, and that is where the deaths are occurred. So when the governor, who in his wise move asked for all the nursing homes and ALFs to get a generator, that's a great idea, but please, I hope that they actually think about the engineering of it, because sometimes the technology is harder than what they do. So here's what we tell people to do in a response. We tell them to evacuate. Evacuate if you need to. Buy supplies, 7 days of water, buy peanut butter, and then you go to the store and you can't find any of that. And I do want to say that during Irma, a lot of people bought a lot of water and nothing ever happened to our water system. I think sometimes people lose their minds and forget that they can just turn on the tap and fill a jug and put it to the side. So I just want to keep that in mind, that sometimes you have to be very smart about that. You need to check your insurance, grab cash, grab gas, all that good stuff. So what if your job doesn't allow you to take off work to do these things? Say your job closes and you don't get paid for time off. What if you don't have disposable income? What if you're living paycheck to paycheck, barely paycheck to paycheck, and they tell you to buy peanut butter is expensive. Have you bought peanut butter recently? It's expensive. It's great protein, but it's expensive. And what if you don't actually own your home or you couch surf? We have a lot of people in this community that couch surf because their means are not there. So disasters and health equity. So if you think about just disasters, just today, not even with the climate change piece, you have people with lower incomes and lowered means that are going to be more affected. They cannot prepare, they cannot leave, They can't board up their homes. They can't do all these things, and their air conditioners already don't work well, and when their power goes out, they suffer more. What about they're less likely to have disaster insurance? You know, we tell everybody, get flood insurance, it's cheap. Well, if you can't afford a meal, you're not going to buy flood insurance, especially if you're renting. You're only going to have what you have. Well, they say, well, have insurance for your valuables inside. Again, if you can't buy the peanut butter, you can't buy the insurance. As beachfront properties are encroached upon, and if the Tampa Bay Planning Council actually does the right thing and does not allow people to build back on the beach, because do you realize how much density we have put on the beach for money? So as beachfront property goes away, where are people going to go? They're going to go inland, and gentrification then comes faster. So preparedness is everybody's responsibility, but some have a harder time than others. And as far as I'm concerned, as the health department and what I do, it is part of my responsibility to help folks understand what they can and can't do or what they need to do. We've talked about other weather extreme adventures, so we already talked about wildfires, air quality. Maria talked all about that. So we want people to prepare, but we also have to understand the vulnerable populations. And so we have people who are at risk, not just by income, but by equity. If you have, and I do want to say again that the Foundation for Healthy St. Pete has done a great job with a lot of talks recently about health equity. And there has been a lot of talk about housing and housing issues in Pinellas County. And there has been historical problems with housing in Pinellas County with which we have issues. So it is those things that we have to address now and can address now that will help us with the climate change later. So the members of the vulnerable populations often have health conditions that are already exacerbated. That's why we try to get access to care as part of the most important thing that we do. Because even though there's been an Affordable Care Act, if you don't have a job with which you can take sick leave, why would you do preventative care? For those of us that have had insurance for a long time and we go get our checkups every year, it seems simple, it seems obvious. But if it takes you 3 hours on a bus to get to a doctor's office, you're not going to do it. So shame on us for thinking that was the easy fix. So what the best thing to do for us is to look at data. And we want to look at data as far as the community. And there was a community health assessment. We do one every year, every 3 years. We have done one recently, and we're going to try to get involved with some of the hospitals to do community health assessments to be able to know what our community really is full of and what vulnerable populations we have. Just for example, in that particular book, which is on the table outside if you'd like it, 14% of Pinellas County is under the poverty level. So 14% of 1 million. Where else can we find data? Florida Charts. If you've ever not visited Florida Charts, it has all the data you could ever want. It tells you about what you can learn about people and what you can learn about Pinellas County, and this is where we can start today. We don't have to wait for 7 centimeters of water. We should do it now. Again, poverty rates, and there's tons of data there that we can identify people who have needs. Foundation for Healthy Pinellas has a great book out now about health equity. Very important for us to read, and again, a good partner. So what is the opposite of vulnerable? Resilient. So can we build resilient communities? Part of the issue with communities nowadays is they don't have a community. Florida is especially unique in that regard because people come from other communities. They keep their New York accent. They keep their New York love. They wear the Yankees hats, and they don't want to learn who their neighbor is. So that's the important part of trying to build resilient communities where you know your neighbor. If you need a jar of peanut butter, you ask your neighbor, and they're going to help you because it's important, because only together can we get this done. Educate and communicate with people that know, and let's build communities and coalitions that can think about these things outside of the box. Again, we did a great job in having affordable care and insurance, but we still haven't fixed some of the equity issues that allow people to go get a doctor's appointment. So health in all policies. another good place to start. Quinn, I want you to raise your hand. Quinn Lundquist works with the health department, and he's tasked with helping health and all policies, and it is what it says. Let's put a health spin at health advocacy in every plan that you write. Let's put bike lanes in, let's put safety regards in, let's put trees in, let's do things that build health issues up instead of just building things so we can drive faster and make bigger parking lots. We're going to take questions at the end, so I thank you for your time. And next.
Thank you so much, Gayle. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Adriana Áñez. She earned her PhD in psychology and neuroscience with a concentration in neuropsychopharmacology from the University of South Florida, Tampa in December 2014. Dr. Áñez is an assistant professor at St. Petersburg College, where she instructs introductory honors and advanced psychology courses from the neuropsychopharmacology interdisciplinary perspective. In addition, Dr. Áñez is the private investigator for the Human Neurophysiology Laboratory, named the Human Element. Dr. Áñez's research interests previously included investigating the neural mechanisms associated with alcohol and cocaine polysubstance abuse, and currently includes measuring neurodiversity in college students. In addition to directing and conducting her own research, Dr. Áñez is the program director for the SPC USF Rothman Pediatric Neuropsychiatry Clinical Research Internship Program. Dr. Áñez has received grants for her research and has been published in psychopharmacology. She has also has clinical experience as an adult program supervisor and addiction prevention specialist at Mental Health Care Inc. and DACO, respectively. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I begin, I would like to start by asking a series of questions. And if the answer is yes or I have, please raise your hand and keep it raised until otherwise directed. Please raise your hand if you have been directly impacted by an earthquake or tsunami. Please raise your hand if you have been directly impacted by a blizzard or ice storm, and you can keep your hands raised. Please raise your hand if you have been directly impacted by a hurricane, tornado, lightning strike, or flash flooding. Please raise your hand if you have been indirectly impacted by any of these extreme weather conditions, such as you donated your time, food, money, clothing, water, even your own home to someone who has lost theirs. You have had to alter your business schedules, consumer schedules, patient schedules, or course schedules. At the very least, raise your hand if you have complained that your insurance premiums have increased following the series of the 2017 billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. Now, if you look around the room, you'll notice that most, if not all of us, have been impacted one way or another. That is definitely not the question. Scientists, politicians, and the media are the professionals responsible for investigating and reporting these effects. And it is my role today to basically expand on this information by targeting the following three questions. One, what are the psychological effects of extreme weather? Two, does extreme weather truly affect all of us? And three, what can we do about it? What can we do to be more resilient and adaptive? But before I can even begin trying to answer these difficult questions, I must first define the term extreme weather. You see, the word extreme by itself refers to an event or an occurrence that brings about threat and devastation, basically ruining our quality of living. And in the case of extreme weather conditions, these weather events bring about threat and devastation, threatening our quality of being. Now, at first glance, hurricanes, tornadoes, flash flooding, lightning strike. These weather conditions come and go. And in psychology, we refer to such characteristics as being episodic. And so in such terms, having an episode of extreme weather doesn't seem like that big of a deal. We can tolerate it, right? We can tolerate the hurricane, perhaps, that comes and goes, even after all of the devastation. But what if these events were to happen over and over and over and over again, ultimately creating a new pattern of living, changing the way that we see what is normal, ultimately changing us? Will we have enough natural resources, financial resources? Will we have enough physical, psychological resources to withstand not just one episode, but multiple episodes, referring to it being chronic, a chronic condition? Or will our world as we know it change, changing us, leaving us feeling hopeless, worthless, leaving us feeling anxious, depressed? And some of us may be able to cope and recover and perhaps adapt, but some of us may not be able to, leaving us at risk for maladaptive coping skills, such as substance use or even violence. So we have discussed a lot of the different types of effects of extreme weather conditions, and definitely something that was brought about earlier and something that I would like to focus on is the effect of extreme heat and what we can do, okay? What we can do to become more educated, more insightful into the effects, the various effects of extreme heat on our body physically as well as psychologically. Extreme heat has adverse physical effects. It presents as heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Heat exhaustion, the signs and symptoms include muscle weakness, fatigue, okay? You kind of feel tired on that one really, really hot day. But in terms of heat stroke, it's much more severe. It can leave you feeling mentally confused or even susceptible to convulsions and death. In fact, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, extreme heat is the #1 killer in the United States, as it causes more deaths each year than hurricanes, lightning, tornadoes, earthquakes, and floods combined. In addition to the physical effects of extreme heat, there are widespread psychological effects, meaning that extreme heat can impede the way that we think, feel, and behave. Specifically, extreme heat will decrease your ability to think logically and rationally. Extreme heat will prevent you from being able to regulate your emotions, leaving you ultimately indecisive as well as argumentative, leading to an increase in aggressive behaviors. In fact, over 2 decades worth of research by Anderson and colleagues have shown that extreme temperatures threaten perceptions, meaning specifically the hotter it gets, the more likely we are to misinterpret someone else's facial expressions and their behaviors and their intentions. We actually view them as being much more hostile than what they are. And at a simple glance, you may think that this only impacts a person or two, but it actually has widespread social impact, as there are professionals out there like law enforcement who work in these extreme heat conditions daily, and they are people too. And they are impacted by extreme heat just like anyone else. So while we have individuals increasing their aggressive nature because of extreme heat, we have our law enforcement officers who may be also misperceiving the actions of others, and they are vulnerable to aggressive behavior as well. In addition to aggression, extreme heat shows impairments in the level of thinking or cognitive performance. And such data as presented here from Harvard and data presented from New York State findings show that the hotter it gets, the less likely students are to perform as well in their exams. This prevents New York students who were not able to pass their exit requirement It prevents them from getting that job that they wanted, prevents them from going to college, it prevents them from their future because of an extreme heat condition. And extreme heat is non-discriminatory, meaning that it impacts all of us, including our Harvard elite. In fact, just this past year, a recent publication came out showing that our Harvard undergraduates performed worse on their exams during a really hot day. And the common factor here is not having any type of relief, not having any air condition to try to cool their bodies down. And the reason why it's important to try to have this level of relief is because our brains are programmed to try to cool our systems down. So if it's really hot outside, the brain creates signals and sends these signals throughout the body to increase blood flow and sweating to help cool yourself down. But the problem is that under chronic extreme heat, those brain signals are reduced, and you're not able to cool yourself down. We talked about the populations at risk, and once again, they include the elderly, the disabled. It includes our pregnant mothers, our children, our athletes, our employees who work outside in extreme heat conditions daily. It includes those individuals diagnosed with hypothyroidism, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. And if you don't fit any of those categories, if you're taking antihistamines, antibiotics, or stimulant-based drugs, you're also at increased risk for the physical and the psychological effects of extreme heat. In addition, as we previously mentioned, extreme heat can increase the severity and the frequency of other extreme weather conditions, such as hurricanes, which leave us at risk for feeling profound anxiety and depression as we prepare for these events over and over again, as we endure these events over and over again, as we attempt to recover from these events over and over again. And a lot of the times, people cannot keep up with it. And even if you think that you have enough of the resources, the continuous presentation of all of these weather conditions will threaten your ability to cope and adapt, leaving you once again feeling hopeless, worthless, guilt and ashamed because you were not able to provide for your family. You were not able to protect your family, yourself, your belongings, and that's where a lot of people fall. That's where they fall victim to. And then you mix in with everything the inability to seek relief from the extreme heat. So you have those cognitive impairments, those behavioral effects. And when things get really rough, depression is one of the major factors leading to suicide. And we may see an increased risk in suicide. According to the CDC, 45,000 suicides occurred in 2016, okay? And the number increased just last year. In addition to that, according to Nature, Climate, and Change, it is expected that suicide rates will increase 1% for every 1 degree Celsius above 90 degrees. So what can we do? You're doing it right now. You're coming out, you're being educated, you're increasing your level of awareness, and that will increase your level of insight to know what it is that you can do, what you can do now to be proactive rather than reactive. Get your water, get your nutritious foods. But if you don't have that available to you, like what was previously mentioned, make sure you have a friendly neighbor so they can borrow it from you, so you can borrow it from them. Or at least try to stock up a little bit throughout the year so that way you're not spending all of your resources and trying to prepare at the very last minute. If all else fails, just as long as you are aware of your own internal environment, feel your heart rate, notice how hard you're breathing. Try to be educated of the signs and symptoms of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, so that way if you notice that things are going awry, all you have to do is ask for help. And it's okay to ask for help. That's something that a lot of people don't think. It's okay to ask for help, to be vulnerable, because in all honesty, we are all vulnerable. But if you know what it is that you need to do, you can do it and you can weather the weather. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adriana. All right, so first thing I want to do is to dive a little bit deeper into this compact that the Regional Resiliency Coalition, that the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council put together. I wanted to bring that to your attention and really highlight that, because what they're doing, and Janet Long, our county commission chair, is really focusing on that, and has been a key leader in that, as well as Susan Glickman, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and many other politicians and leaders around. And so one of the things to think about that is each community will have the ability to develop individual responses as a community that makes sense for them. So it wouldn't make sense for someone in interior Pasco County to do the same thing that our community, where I live in Gulfport. Those are two different spaces, two different sets of needs. We have coastal, they're not so coastal, they have other things going on for them. So what makes sense for that community? So I was hoping that one of you might want to discuss more about that event this morning, and really what's going on with that.
Well, I think that the most important part is that they're going to come together as a coalition. So all the 25 municipalities, towns, and cities basically agreed that there is a problem and they're going to come at it together. And I think that's the most important part, because you're right, interior parts are going to have differences than the coastal climates. But in the end, you know, we're one global community. You know, we talked a little bit about conditions that are coming around. Red tide actually is sometimes fed by Saharan desert dust. And actually some of the hurricanes are fed by some of the African winds. So, you know, the whole butterfly effect, it matters. So what somebody may do in Gulfport may actually help something in Pasco County.
Yeah, so I just want to add a comment that there's a model in Miami. They developed the Southeast Florida Climate Compact about 10 years ago. I think they're going to have their 10th anniversary. So the reality is storm surge doesn't stop at the county line. A hurricane doesn't say, hey, I'm going to go to Pinellas and miss Hillsborough. And so I think over time, it's really helpful to have a planning process like this overlaying onto our regional planning, which we plan for roads, but to be doing this integrated planning around how can we build more resilient cities, what can we do to work together to do it, and then most importantly, I think this is a key theme, is how do we prepare communities, that resiliency really lies within our communities. And I just want to quote somebody from the emergency management group who I heard say one time, in a disaster, your neighbor is your first responder, right? So how do we create that kind of resiliency that your neighbor might bring you a jar of peanut butter, or, you know, if they've got power and you don't, you go over there. And so really, how do we create that? It's not just resilient infrastructure we're talking about something much more dynamic, resilient communities. So.
Okay, that's great. And on the note of communities and resiliency, I don't know how many of you are aware, the city of St. Pete has a director of sustainability and resiliency. Her name is Sharon Wright, and that's a new office that Mayor Kreisman put into place in the last couple of years. And their big focus on resiliency. I just want to highlight a couple of things that are positive, because sometimes all of this can come together and you can feel like, oof. So one of the things that's positive is recently on the 18th Avenue South, the city planted a lot of trees. I don't know if you all have had a chance to notice that, but adding trees means we can capture carbon. If you capture carbon, that's a natural thing that a tree is going to do to make photosynthesis and make their energy. That takes our carbon out of the air. So if we can all plant trees, I know it sounds really simplistic, but it's actually not. But then I want to circle back. I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'm going to circle back to where we are in Midtown, in this community. And I really want to think about what can we do to help people with that resiliency that you were just talking about, and that dynamic thing. And what kind of resources are we going to need to pull together? I was a grant manager for 4.5 years of a federal grant, so I'm always thinking money. And I'm always thinking, how are we going to help people if it's $500, let's say, to put together the list of things on the hurricane list? How are we going to help them get there? What can we do? And I'm not just saying grants, but that comes to mind, but what are some other opportunities that we could do to help people respond?
So I'm happy to start, and then Gayle can chime in. So one of the I did not evacuate during Irma. I'm sort of tend to have a non-evacuation sort of bone in me. I was in Cedar Key and had 4 feet of water underneath my house. I didn't evacuate, but I was on an elevated house. So where am I going with this? So I want to get to the $500 point, but I want to say I think one of the things that struck me in Irma is the kind of disaster on disaster we had of people not knowing where to go, and that I remember the governor saying there's plenty of safe places here. So we really need, one of the things we really need to make sure is that within every community there's safe places for them to be, rather than getting on the road, having a gas shortage. I mean, most people can't afford to leave, so I was in evacuation zone A. I just went to higher ground. So how do we help people do this? Well, I'm going to give a little plug. My colleague is over there in the audience, David McDougall. So one of the things we're working on is the Florida Disaster Resiliency Initiative. And under this plan, we would work with communities and try to direct funding into communities where they could have access to some of these resources, like how do you give them $500 to say we want to buy a solar generator, or even taking a community center and taking it off grid with solar panels and a battery backup, so they could, for 1 week, they could be the energy source for their neighborhood. So I don't know if that indirectly answered the question, but I think we've got a lot of resources that we can leverage, particularly pulling funds together.
And I think that there's some historical issues with Midtown. You know, for those of you that know that 175 sort of split the community, you know, years ago. So there's those historical racial epithets that we really need to address as well, because the community of Midtown is a great community and they are together resilient, but together they may not have the resources. So I don't want to be simplistic, but in the end, we should make sure that the community doesn't have to move if they don't need to, and give them what they need. So that's why when we do population-based planning, we look at pockets of communities that have issues. And, you know, for example, a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about ALFs and nursing homes. You know, they're really concerned about those groups. Those are businesses. I just want to be clear. They're businesses that are regulated and they're licensed. There are a lot of communities that are adult communities that are lower income, that are independent living, and they're living day to day in a room with which they can communicate and they can work. So these are the places that we don't think about often. There are a lot of sober houses that people have to get methadone treatment every day. And then what happens during a hurricane? I mean, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night, because I don't know how to help everybody all the time, because I have a million people that I have to put under my wing. So those are the things that we need to, and what I would really like to do, not just talk about resiliency, but look at champions of the community. When we talk about HIV and we talk about testing people, we're missing about 25% of the population. We need to go to each community and find the champions and tell them that testing is okay, it's important. Same with hurricanes and resiliency. It's important for you to plan, and it's okay for you to ask for help, because there is ultimately another issue with asking for help. Sometimes people don't want to identify themselves as needing help, because it's a stigma. You know, we need to talk about stigmas and talk about really huge stigmas that we have in some of our communities. You know, it's interesting that you say, has anybody been on 18th Avenue South? Mm-hmm. I'd like to see the hands raised with somebody that's driven down 18th Avenue South recently. But I digress.
That's a really great point, and there is certainly a cultural divide north and south of Central Avenue and other things that we really need to bring into this conversation. I know that during Irma, we evacuated. We live in Gulfport in a C zone. We went to Kenwood, had a friend that had a place we could stay. And but when we went home, you know, we had that situation, and we live very close to Child's Park. And so really up there in the space with people and needing to see those champions, and they were there. I want to really call that out. I heard about a lot of great activities, but I think we need to figure out what kind of social network we can develop to increase that and strengthen that. I mean, it's already there. I don't want to say it in any way it's not. I just want to say, what can we do to bring that together? Now, with that, I'd like to ask the audience, what kind of questions might you have? Hang on just one second. I will ask you to wait for Jackie to bring the microphone to you so that we can capture this on the recording. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually thinking about this. I was reading this one news report, and you guys were talking about a heat stroke. There was one idea that was basically happening in Los Angeles. They would paint the parking lots from black to white, and by doing that, that would actually reduce the temperature by 30 to 40 degrees.
Right.
By doing that, that can actually save a lot of people from heat stroke because, you know, especially like I go to college in SPC Seminole, when you go out into those parking lots, it's very hot, and someone has passed out, and I have seen people when I traveled out of state, even as far north as Washington during the summertime. People have passed out with heat stroke because it is so hot, and I feel like that with the scientific method, like a lot of people know that having lighter colors has actually been known to reduce the temperature. So I feel like that if we were to do that with the parking lots and streets, we can actually help reduce some kind of that issue. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Questions? Yes. Back there. Can you wait just one sec?
Okay. Extreme heat was mentioned a few times. What temperature qualifies as extreme heat? Great question.
Temperatures over 90 degrees. So that's a lot here in Florida.
December.
Does anyone know, I know after the governor and the state passed that requirement about backup generators, then they put a moratorium on it. And they extended the moratorium twice. Do you know if that moratorium is still in existence or if they lifted it?
They lifted it.
Oh, good.
And each nursing home and ALF had to have they actually had to have a plan. And if they did not have a plan, they had to let the residents of their community know that they were not compliant.
Right. My mother was in one at the time. So, second question, we talk about trees, but we can't just plant an oak tree in our yard because they're huge.
Right.
So are you suggesting that trees be planted in certain locations, and which trees?
So I'm happy to say something about that. Gayle can as well. So yeah, so this is a good point, right? So the heat island effect in a city is not necessarily, it's created by this collective impervious surface, so not just our house. So there's actually been studies looking at beneficial sides and what trees to plant to kind of, there's a direct shading of your house, which can keep your house cool. But, you know, when you look around the parking lots, I mean, I drive around parking lots in Tampa, and I just kind of like get a little ballistic. So I think where I'm talking about planting them is these vast, open, impervious surfaces where that heat is just reflecting upwards. And people are trying to study this and see what does it take to reduce it. But I've seen that some figures that suggest a 10% increase in the tree canopy, and we're not just talking about any trees, it's specific ones, could reduce the surface temperature by 25 to 35 degrees. So imagine if our parking lots, all that heat wasn't radiating outward. So these big open spaces, as well as green roofs and greening the side of buildings, will just lower that. And I love the idea of painting everything white instead of black asphalt. I'd never heard that before. So that's, and Gayle may have some comments as well.
Well, and
So
this
big
is
open-
really the point of having health in all policies. You know, there is specific codes required for parking lots. You know, you have to have a handicap space, you need so many spaces for how many occupants you have to have, and then you have to have retention ponds for runoff. But retention ponds are just a pit of sewage of everything that comes off of that, you know, parking lot. You know, you have the oil from the vehicles and everything else. So, you know, we need to think about this bigger. So let's not just talk about trees, but let's talk about everything that comes with these parking lots. And, you know, trying to park better. You know, maybe a nice a green space on top of a parking garage with trees and whatnot, and then your car is cool already because you're in a parking garage, and then you can put more people in instead of having this vast space of asphalt. So, you know, that's really the point of health in all policies, is think about the impact of everything you do and the emissions with which the cars are bringing to the people, you know. So you need the trees to take away the carbon monoxide, so.
Yeah, I want to say at the very least, every bus stop should have some sort of shade on top of it. I drive by so many bus stops, they don't even have a shelter on top, but a tree or a shelter or something, because it's just, you know, having ridden the bus, if you sit out in the sun, I mean, I don't need to tell you guys, you've all experienced it. You live in Florida. Sitting in the sun, you get hotter. Sitting in the shade, you're
And you have to wait 2 hours for the bus to get there.
And one more quick thing while we're on transportation, another good note, we did have the E-Looper, the Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, recently with this help with Suncoast Sierra Club, got 2 electric buses, and we're on the slate to get more, and so that is a great start. And something else to think about in regard to the white pavement. If you reduce the heat and then you reduce the air conditioning load for the buildings next to it, then you've double reduced, because then you don't have as much consumption and then you don't have as much climate carbon emissions from that. So it's really great. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm so sorry for always asking questions, but this is another idea. I actually remember I read a report from Vox or Vice, but apparently in major cities, and this was actually something that I was also doing a school project on. Apparently, Tampa has one of the worst public transportation systems in the entire country, and yet we're one of the fastest growing cities in the country, which is very shocking considering if you have a lot, it's actually been known that if you have a lot more public transportation buses, trams, basically areas that not that many people have to use cars, you can actually reduce on environmental issues like CO2 and stuff like that. And it's also been known to help people because by having those public transportations, by having less cars, you can have more space to develop the city. You know, you won't have to build highways, you won't have to build, basically take up all these areas of land, and you could build more parks, more tree foliage, which would be a great idea.
Absolutely. Gayle, you want, or Maria?
Yeah, there's the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council also has a regional transportation plan, but because of the bifurcation of Tampa and St. Pete, there's just arguments abounding. And for what you may have heard, it's that, you know, we're planning for 50 years in the future, but nobody will start now. So we keep talking about it and talking about it, and people are moving to Pinellas County, even though it's built out. People are moving to Tampa Bay. They said today how many more millions of people are going to be in Florida, and it's not going to get any. One more lane on the Howard Franklin is not going to matter. I hate to tell anybody, you know. So.
Any other questions? I think back there, gentlemen.
Yes, it was mentioned about the social and economic inequalities and how that disproportionately is affected by climate change. I was hoping you all could somehow discuss not so much the intrapersonal or the interpersonal conflicts that may arise out of this, but the intergroup conflicts that may exist when you see that certain groups or certain populations are not seeing resources, how that might affect what they think of themselves and what they're willing to do in order to get those resources. I think that's a big problem that we should consider.
Want to address that?
So when thinking about groups in general, you also have to think about how other people perceive those specific groups. And unfortunately, no matter where you are, there's always a bias towards a specific group, and that grows and fosters prejudice, discrimination, as well as stigma. And in terms of all of this, and taking extreme weather conditions into account, we need to identify those people that are at greatest risk for such incapabilities of getting those types of resources or having people provide relief to those specific groups. We need to increase awareness, and we need to develop a better strategic type of plan so that way we can target not only individual people but groups as well. That's one of the focuses here at SPC, taking a more of a community approach rather than an individualistic approach. Definitely something that warrants a lot more conversation, because what we need to do is definitely decrease and lower those barriers and try to provide our resources to other people so that way everyone is equally as capable in trying to adapt and recover.
Yes, I'd like to find out whether you have advice for people that lives in the high-rise building that is on evac zone A, and they would say that I live on the 10th floor, the surge is not going to be that high, I have all my supply. What is your advice to that? Is it okay for them to stay at their unit?
It is not. So the surge numbers that I showed you, so with A, it's 11 feet, and that's 11 feet now. You know, it doesn't take into account what may happen in the future. But what people don't understand is that as the wall of water comes, that does not account for the waves on top of the 11 feet of water, nor does it account for all the debris that gets swept with. Think about all the boats out in the water that all of a sudden become, if you ever, did anybody ever see any of the information from Mississippi and all the casino boats? It's a casino, but it's really a boat. They all ended up on land, and anything underneath it got swept. So, you know, I hear people say that all the time. I hear people say they're not going to leave, and I recognize their fears of change and where they're going to go. But as emergency management always says, you have to go tens of miles, not hundreds of miles. And I do know that for the evacuation during Irma, a lot of the schools took in people from the community, even though they were in a non-evacuation zone, but they wanted to be safe because they were worried about electricity and food. And same with hospitals. Hospitals took in a boatload of people that did not belong there because it was a community effort, because of fear also. You know, so the people that are on the water need to go. And I can't argue with people who don't go, but I will tell them they need to go. Because in the end, you saw what happened in North Carolina. It happens every time. They're plucking people off of roofs. People go in their attic, and what the emergency managers will tell you is that if you're going in your attic, take an axe with you, because you will not be able to get out. And they found people in their attic who had drowned. So it's just unfortunate because, just like I told you about measles, I can't convince everybody, but I can convince a few. And in the end, I also have to tell them where to go. Like we said, we can't just say, go. We have to say, you should go here. The hotels are closed. Well, go a little bit farther, but just go in high ground. Go into a library. Go anywhere you can. Because in the end, if you're on the road and you're still in a zone with which there's a problem, they're going to put you in a place of last resort. So basically, the law enforcement opens the door to some building, they shove you in, they shut the door, and say, here we go.
Yeah, I just want to say that one thing that really came home to me, so I did leave and go to a high ground,
Thank you.
but not, and so my bad behavior. So one of the things you don't think about, but I think that got stated really well in Irma, so if you're on the 11th floor and you're dry, but you have a heart attack, emergency services cannot get to you, and emergency services don't operate in the middle of the storm. So just keep that in mind, because I think we don't realize that. So if you're surrounded by water, it's great that there are people in boats going to get you, but you don't want to be having a heart attack in an 11th floor building surrounded by water in the middle of a hurricane.
Yeah, there is a time when 911 turns off, and everybody that's in the queue, they're in a queue. And it's first come, first serve. And then the reason it's turned off is because all ambulances and fire department trucks are high-profile vehicles, and they cannot drive over 40 mile per hour sustained winds. Now, that doesn't mean a gust. They're still going to do their best, but after that, they pull off the road and they wait, and that's for their safety as well. And that's what happens. People are like, please, and it's heart-wrenching to hear the please come, and they can't.
And just real quick, I used to live in New Orleans, and I lived in a high-rise. And when I left here before Katrina, but my friends still lived in that high-rise, the roof collapsed, and it went down 2 floors. And all the windows were blown out, and nothing was left, like throughout the entire building. So I would not, it was a 7-story building, I would not assume that a high-rise is safe in any kind of way. We have one more question, and this is the final question.
You mentioned that the room is the same with a lot of like-minded individuals, and that's something that is something that's passionate for my spirit too, that people of like mind are always having the same discussions. What are your specific recommendations to broaden those conversations, particularly in St. Petersburg and in Pinellas County?
What I think we have to do is we have to what I am going to do is I'm going to work with the health and all policies and with the lawmakers and the decision makers and try to change the laws and the policies that I can change, because I do believe that there is a percent of people that I will not be able to change their heart. And I too am a scientist, and I have worked for a long time in public health, and I've seen people poo-poo science. And it's at that point where I don't believe I can convince them. I don't know if I can change their heart or change their mind. So I'm going to change the world around them and just do it without them. Because I think ultimately, if we put health in all policies and we think about things that matter to human beings, it doesn't matter if you're an R or a D or you think that 9/11 was a conspiracy. That's what matters, and that's why I said public health is my passion. People are my passion, and we have to make sure that we work with all people and what their needs are. And I think that's what we do sometimes. I think we work with people globally, but not really recognizing the true needs, and not just physical needs, but the implicit bias that is in our community. It's there, and I'm not an expert by any means, but I've seen it and I've touched it, and I don't know how to fix it, because again, how do I make people change what's in their heart? So my plan is to work on the plans, work on the policymakers. Janet Long has been a great person to help champion this cause, and that's what I plan on doing.
And as a league person, I would say vote and get out there and do things that are going to be good for the climate, good for people restoring their right to vote, all kinds of things. I can talk lots and lots, and I won't about that, but if you have any questions, please just ask. And now I'd like to introduce Mary Beth Dunn. She is the Executive Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Thank you. Thank you so much, panel. That was just such a great presentation and really important topic. I think they deserve a round of applause, don't you? Wonderful. I wanted to say thank you to Jacqueline. I wanted to say thank you to St. Pete College and also to the Institute for co-sponsoring this event with us. It was a really important topic that we all need to learn more about. I want to say thank you to the Foundation for Healthy St. Pete for funding the work that we do, and also a lot of the work that you do around the room here, I heard tonight. And lastly, I really want to thank all of you for being here. You're the ones who matter. You're the ones who are out there who are going to make a difference. And it's up to you to learn more, to go out there, do something about it, educate your family, your friends, your colleagues. And we can all do something. We can all do, whether it's flipping off a switch when you leave, making sure that your home and that your vehicle is energy efficient, educate your friends and colleagues, like I said, becoming an activist, writing a letter to the editor, talking to your legislatures. What do they believe in? Do they believe in what you believe in? And are you going to hold them to the fire? The elections are coming up. Talk to the candidates. Make them earn your vote. Find out what it is that they're going to do for you and make sure they do it. And lastly, join an organization. Maybe join PSR Florida. Appreciate you all being here tonight, and I'm going to turn it over now to David Clements, Executive Director of the Institute.
Well, thank you, Mary Beth, and I want to also thank and recognize our speakers and moderator, Lisa, for doing a great job. It's a privilege and an honor to work with Physicians for Social Responsibility, the League of Women Voters. I also like to add my thanks to the Foundation for a Healthy St. Pete for providing the food that is available out in the hallway. And I would be remiss if I did not recognize the person responsible for making this all work, my colleague Jacqueline Schuett. May I have a round of applause? This program is one that developed out of the priorities identified by our Sea-Levelized Collaborative, which came about from a conference the Institute presented in 2015 called Sea Level Rise, What's Our Next Move? Well, I'm happy to tell you that our next move is to host another conference on that topic in next spring in April. So please stay tuned. And you can find resources such as videos from our past events and programs on this topic under the collaborative heading on our website, which is solutions.spcollege.edu. Pretty simple. And you'll also find information on our upcoming programs there as well. Speaking of which, I would like to call your attention to a program we're having 2 nights from tonight, Wednesday, at the All-State campus, which is just about a mile or 2 south of here on 34th Street. CNN analyst Bakari Sellers, you may have seen him as a commentator on CNN from time to time, will be speaking, and it's another opportunity the college is presenting to highlight the Social and Behavioral Sciences Week here at SPC. We hope you'll consider joining us there. There are flyers on the table on that program and on others we're having in the next few weeks. That's it. Thank you for coming, and have a safe journey home. Good night.